Hello and welcome to part 2 of the Elements of Preservation. This series of webinars marks the beginning of the Finding Common Ground collaborative training for the Cultural Heritage and Emergency Response Communities program. The Finding Common Ground is funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and administered by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners and supported by our partners, CoStep Mass, the Massachusetts Archives, the New England Museum Association, the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and the Massachusetts Department of Fire Services. The Elements of Preservation consists of a series of recorded webinars that will help all participants come to the first in-person workshop at the same level. If you have any questions when progressing through these recordings, please don't hesitate to contact me, your instructor, Danya Khan. So we left off with mold and pests from the last recorded section, and so now we're going to dive into the environment. Managing the environment is one of the best ways that we can protect and preserve our collections, and it is important to understand how temperature, relative humidity, light, and air quality affect our collections. It's not always just a single concern, but one where we will be herding cats. Trying to control all of these elements in sync is going to be very difficult. For collections with a wide variety of materials, one simple setting for temperature and relative humidity will not be safe or sufficient for all. Different materials require different environments, and it will be up to the institution to understand the various needs of their collections. In addition to temperature and relative humidity, air quality and light can have a big impact on the deterioration of collections. Visible light will fade colors, and ultraviolet light will speed the process of embrittlement of paper. Dust and volatile organic compounds or pollution will affect the air quality inside the building and also the rate of deterioration of collections. So, although many people talk about climate control, in reality we don't really control it. We simply manage it. We're almost never in control because of all of the factors in play. In respects to climate management, our first question should always be, what type of building do we have? And this is important because the type of building that you have in many ways will contribute a lot to your ability to be able to manage the environment. So buildings can be broken down into 6 classes. And many of us may have only one type of this building under our purview, but some of us may have multiples, and you'll have a range of these different types of buildings. These buildings are classified according to some professional standards, but have really been codified for us by Richard Kirshner at the Shelburne Museum in Vermont. So Class 1 buildings are open structures such as lean-tos, covered bridges, open pole barns, and things of that nature. Class 2 buildings are basic sided buildings such as sheds, barns, or cabins with no insulation. Class 3 buildings are standard historic house-type buildings with framed and sided walls and simple glazed windows or uninsulated masonry structures with shallow crawl spaces or basements. So the image that we're seeing here is a lighthouse keeper's cottage on Cape Cod, and this is an example of one of our Class 3 buildings. Class 4 buildings are more typical of high-quality historic houses and buildings with tight wooden construction or heavy masonry with single glazed or storm windows. This building could also be a Class 4 because of its location. I'm not really sure, but I'm guessing it's more of a Class 3. Class 5 buildings are modern, newly built structures with metal and concrete frames, tight construction, insulated walls, and double glazed windows. And finally, Class 6 buildings represent a room within a room or a double wall construction with insulated and sealed walls and are most commonly found in storage vaults. So even within our own building, we could have multiple styles of construction. So if we've had new vaults built for our storage, then we may have a Class 6 building attached to a Class 5 building. Or if we're in a Carnegie Library building that's had modern additions onto it, we could have a Class 3 or Class 4 building with a Class 5 building attachment. So we are looking at multiples within our own building as well. Once we figured out what type of building we have, we want to next ask ourselves where our building is. Are we located on the coast, again, as in this example of the Lighthouse Keeper's home on Cape Cod, or are we more inland? Are we in the Pioneer Valley? Are we, far western, southwestern Mass? Are we in the Berkshires? Are we in that area, I guess it's called Metro West, which is more inland but somewhat coastal, where we could get a little bit of both. Are we to the north of the state or to the south of the state? There's often quite different weather on the North Shore than there is on the South Shore. And we want to look into why our location is important, and we will do a lot of that when we look at risk assessment, but it's also important to have an understanding of our climate that that our building is situated in, because that climate will have a big impact on how we manage our internal climate. So after determining the type of building we have and where it is situated, the next question we need to ask is, what sort of equipment do we have to manage our climate indoors? And typically a building will have one or more of the following pieces of equipment. The potential is that you have nothing, that you are truly an historic house. A lot of the buildings in historic Deerfield that you would go and tour have nothing. They are strictly very much in the style that they were when they were built. Some of us could have ceiling fans to help circulate air. Some of us may simply just have a furnace, either a forced air or radiant system. Some of us may have window air conditioning units, and some of us may have a full heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or HVAC system. And the image we have here is of one of those big HVAC systems. So ensuring our climate management is sustainable will depend not only on our building type and our equipment, but also the climate the building exists in, as we talked about, and the maintenance of the external and internal building envelope. The building envelope will extend to all below-grade elements of the building, including the foundation, the walls, and the floor, as well as any above-ground systems such as roofing and gutters and window frames and things of that nature. So the better condition your building is, the better able you will be managing your environment, and the more sustainable, or the less power, electricity, and therefore money you will have to expend to maintain that environment. So temperature is a very familiar term to all of us, especially as we move into the extremes of our season. So as we move into summer or as we move into winter, we're all very aware of the temperature outside. And it's a measure of, chemically and physically, it is a measure of the vibration of the molecules in our collection materials as well as in our own bodies. And the basic building block of our materials and ourselves is a molecule, and these molecules are constantly vibrating. And when the temperature increases, it pours more energy into essentially the chemical system, and the molecules vibrate more quickly and begin to expand. And this is where we were talking about in the previous webinar, where the increase in temperature of 18 degrees Fahrenheit doubles the reaction rate, and it is because those molecules are vibrating more quickly, and in their vibration and their expansion, they start to bump into other molecules, which causes different chemical reactions, which are detrimental to our collections. Conversely, when the temperature falls and we drop those 18 degrees Fahrenheit, we can have that deterioration rate and slow down our decay. And so our molecules will not vibrate as quickly as the temperature falls, and they will also contract, making it less likely for there to be chemical reactions. There is no single ideal temperature for all of our collection materials. Temperature settings for public and staff spaces should, in an ideal world, be between 64 and 68, and really shouldn't exceed 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And it gets to be complicated when we have staff and public spaces that also double as storage and exhibit spaces, because then we have materials in environments that maybe they don't really want to be at. And so if you take a look at the chart that's here on the screen, you'll see that we have, I've broken it out to you in good, better, and best increments, and then also ranges that you really want to avoid going above. And so as you can see, if you have an institution where you do need to have storage that's combined into public or staff spaces, the best things would really be to have paper, books, textiles, black and white photographs, because at least they will be okay at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, even though they would much prefer to be at 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and ideally at 40. But most of us can't afford to control our climate, or manage our climate to that extent. But the more that we can strive, the better off our collections will be. And it all really depends on your budgets and the type of building you have and the system that you have. So these are the ideal, but we will always strive to do the best that we can for our collections. The problems that we can have when our temperature is much too high is that increased degradation speed. But that can lead to embrittlement of paper. It can lead to brittle textiles, especially if you think of some of those weighted silks and some of those heavily bleached cottons or linens. Canvas for paintings and our leather goods will really be damaged by high temperatures. You really get a rapid increase in nitrate film degradation, which is very problematic. If you have high humidity, you really are in danger of mold growth. Color film will fade. Even if it's in the dark, if the temperatures are too high, it will fade. If you have waxed cylinders or waxed doll heads, or to be perfectly honest, anything made out of wax, high temperatures will really be problematic. The wax will start to melt and you will get odd deformations, especially if the materials are not oriented the way that they would normally want to be. So if your waxed doll head doll is lying horizontally in a box, the back of her head or his may flatten out because of the weight of the wax and the shifting of the wax and high temperatures. You also will get increased off-gassing of plasticizers in new and historic plastics. So that's really something we want to watch out for as well, because those plasticizers, when released, become our volatile organic compounds and can be damaging to other collections in the general vicinity. So temperature and relative humidity are directly related, and you really can't separate them. So when the temperature changes, so too will the relative humidity, and that has to deal with the pressure in the air and how much moisture the air can hold at any given temperature. So all organic collection materials, your papers, your leathers, parchments, textiles, etc., will absorb and release water easily. In other terms, they're hygroscopic. So when the humidity is high, they will absorb the moisture and expand. And any of us who have tried to take a book off of a tightly packed shelf in a library in August really understands how that can impact our collections, because the books get very difficult to take off the shelf. When the humidity is low, conversely, they will release moisture and shrink. This movement can lead to distortion in parchment bindings and other parchment in general, and other really sensitive collection materials like paintings. Paintings will start to buckle and slump when it's hot. They will start to shrink back when it's humid, shrink back when it's dry, and that can lead to a lot of the cracking and crazing that we see, but also a lot of deformation of the canvas layer as well. Another concern at high relative humidities are insect activities, mold, and then swelling of our photographic gelatin. These are all much more likely at higher relative humidities. Low relative humidity can be problematic too. It can really lead to stiffening of leather binding materials, especially so when they need to move, they can't. Leather in general will become very stiff, so you need to be aware of any of your leather costumes, maybe any leather goods, upholstery that may get used. It could be problematic. You'll get flaking of emulsion layers from photographic and motion picture film. You can also get flaking of the binder layer, the magnetic layer on cassette tapes and reel-to-reel audio. You'll also get the loss of flexibility in paper, so as it gets really dry, and here we're talking under 20% relative humidity. So if your paper is already brittle, it will lose even more flexibility and become more brittle. So these are just a couple of examples of the things that can happen. So again, like with our temperature, we have our relative humidity chart here, and we're really laying down, again, the good, the better, and the best, and where we really need to avoid. So you can take a moment to take a look at that. Use the charts. They're really helpful. It can be a way for you to justify some movement of collections. So if you have collections storage in the basement, you may want to think about moving things more like metal, stone, glass, things that really, well, maybe not so much the metal, but stone and glass and ceramics that wouldn't be as impacted by the high relative humidities and also wouldn't be as tasty of a treat for your insect or rodent pests as well. So looking at our chart and thinking about the relative humidity, what are some of the ways that if we're in that red column or even sometimes in the good column, what are some of the dangers that incorrect relative humidity can result in? Well, you can get those warping book covers, you can get cockling of paper, you can get the curling of photographs or cracking emulsion. If you have manuscripts or any sort of artwork on parchment, you really get a lot of flaking inks and colorants. Metals can corrode. I mean, we all see what happens. Well, we all see what happens to our cars when, well, at least when our cars were mostly steel in the winter in these northern climates. But we also see it in just about any metal that's left outside. We get that corrosion from both the relative humidity and the pollutants. We can get crazing on the surface of paintings, again, from that expanding and contracting canvas, or we can get really large cracks from the expansion and contraction if we have wooden panel paintings. And then we also can see cracking or loosening in furniture as that wood expands and contracts. Those joints are going to loosen up and can be very problematic. And of course, there are so many other examples, and I'm sure a lot of you can find them within your own collections. So what can we do to prevent these dangers from high temperatures and high relative humidities, or low temperatures or low relative humidities? What we can do, there's a lot of different routes that we can take. So first of all, some of the more simple things, if we have a climate management system, is simply closing doors and windows that may be propped open by staff or by visitors because they think they need to add something or detract something from the climate. We can install central environmental controls so that we don't have staff going in and changing the thermostat in their area because they don't think the temperature is comfortable, and then that impacts our storage areas. And again, here education is an important thing. If you've got staff changing the temperature in their area because they don't want to put on a sweater, and then that turns around and changes the environment in the storage area and brings the temperature up to about 80 degrees, then you have a problem. So education can also help. You can change, if you have an HVAC system, you can change the mix of outside and inside air. There's usually ratios that are set, especially during dry or damp times of year, and that will help ease the work the system has to do, but also can help to manage the climate better. You can use portable air conditioning units, attic fans, humidifiers, dehumidifiers, as long as you are making sure that the portable device won't compete with an underperforming HVAC system. And for dehumidifiers in particular, make sure they're rated for the size of space that you have and that you have an easy way to connect to a drain so that you aren't having to constantly remember to go and change those water bins that are on the backs of the dehumidifiers. Because if you just have a big tray of water sitting around, that's just going to add to the humidity in the room if you aren't constantly changing them. We can remove collections from attics, which tend to be very hot and humid in the winter, or in the summer, sorry, and very dry in the winter, and basements, which are usually damp. And if we can't do that, again, we'll go back to those charts and find the collections that aren't as susceptible to those temperature and relative humidity changes and store those items in those areas and get the more sensitive items out. We can improve the insulation of our buildings with weather stripping, caulking, or storm windows. For historic homes, you can make storm windows that attach with magnets that are very easy to put in and take out and don't really detract from the original beauty of the home. We can reduce sunlight to control heat in the summer, of course, by using draperies or shades or blinds. And we can provide good routine maintenance for our mechanical equipment. That is so important. And then we can decrease our moisture by installing vapor barriers, especially in our basements. There is a lot that you can do to help combat the dampness. So because I had said that temperature and relative humidity are related, if you just go and you change one element of the two, you're going to alter the balance. And so it's really important that you think about when you're changing the temperature, how that's going to impact the relative humidity. And a really good source for information on all of this is the Image Permanence Institute did a sustainable environments program, and they have a lot of really good in-depth information on managing the environment within your buildings. And I highly recommend going and watching their free webinars, but also taking a little bit of time to look through their websites and also ordering the handbook that came with the program. It's an incredibly helpful resource. So in order to have an accurate record of existing environmental conditions throughout our buildings, we really do need to monitor and record temperature and relative humidity with instruments designed for that purpose. So the focus of monitoring programs is really mostly on storage spaces, but if you can keep track of the public and staff places, you'll have a better overall picture of the conditions in the entire building. You'll also be able to start to tell if somebody changes the temperature in the public spaces because there have been complaints, what that corresponding change does to the storage spaces, so you can start to work around some of that. Concrete, accurate data will also demonstrate the capability of your current climate management systems. And so it may be a way to identify the problems that you may be having in the systems, or when it's time to get a new system. Under the best circumstances, monitoring will indicate that the available climate management system is operating at its ideal capacity. So hopefully that is what you will have. When the environment is not ideal, a monitoring program can be very useful in providing data showing that the climate control system is inadequate. climate management, sorry, documenting the severity of existing problems that will support the need to add, change, or maintain machinery. It also helps to evaluate the effects that changes that have been made have had to existing climate control equipment, and it will help guard against any environmental extremes that may occur during normal operations, or at least alert you to when some of these environmental extremes happen, so that, like with pests, if you know they come in the fall, you can, when you know when you're switching from heating to cooling, there's always a problem, you can start to plan for that and help to mitigate the effects that may occur during those transitional periods. So light, at its most fundamental, is electromagnetic radiation, and particular radiation of a wavelength that is visible or not visible to the human eye, and it's a very common cause for damage in our collections. Most of our materials are particularly sensitive to light. Paper, both in the paper in and of itself, as well as any inks or colorants that may be on it, our textiles, our leathers, photographs, especially color, and a lot of the media that we find, inks, colorants, dyes, adhesives. There are so many things that are really impacted by light. Aside from fading, which is the most obvious that we find, other damage can include damage to the actual physical structure, because light, like temperature, adds energy to the chemical system and increases those rates of degradation. And so it will result in different damage, but it's still providing energy that's increasing the degradation to our collections. And one of the most important things to remember is that all light is damaging. So visible light, ultraviolet radiation technically, as well as infrared radiation, all provide energy to fuel these chemical reactions. And while ultraviolet is blamed for most of it, because it does introduce more energy, visible light is also problematic. So the intensity of the light and the exposure time can lead to fading or changing of colors, which you can see here demonstrated in both the flag, that you can see the lines where it had been hung opposite a window that had many panes, and you can actually see where the structure of the window blocked just enough light to not have it fade as much. And you can see on the book here just where the bookend was when this book was on the shelf. So you can see it can be terribly dramatic. And there's no reversing this. Once it's faded, it's not going back. So on top of fading and color shifts, ultraviolet radiation will lead to weakening and yellowing and sometimes bleaching, it's very odd, of paper and other organic materials. And all of these changes can diminish the aesthetic qualities as well as the readability of the information and the artwork. So again, just remember, this is irreversible. So if you have had a photograph out on display for years and you think, oh, I should take it down, even taking it down and putting it in the dark is not going to restore any of that image. It will just continue to fade when taken out again. So how do we protect our materials against light? In storage areas, we can try to make sure that as many of our materials are in boxes as we can. That not only protects it from light but also dust. But we can also try to make sure that we are keeping the lights off when no one is in storage. And we can do that either by really trying to train staff to turn lights on and off on their own, or installing motion sensors so that whenever somebody walks in, the lights are on and then they will automatically go off. And just as a side note, this also helps to save on our electricity costs if you have the control over your lights. I know some institutions don't. We can filter fluorescent lights with either UV blocking sleeves or move ahead in the direction that many institutions are going and switching out to fiber optic or LED lighting, which again saves on electricity costs and doesn't contain the the ultraviolet content that fluorescent lights give off. And we can also cover our windows with shades, blinds, and other sorts of light blocking methods. So if you have combined storage and staff spaces, again, we want to try to cover windows and skylights with UV blocking film and or shades that should be closed during the most intense light of the day. I caution against the automatic shades that come down. I've had them in institutions I've worked at, and they stop working, and then the cost of repairing them is so high that the institution just decides to forego fixing it. So human-propelled shades and draperies are much better. Again, we can filter any fluorescent lights we have, or better yet, switch to LEDs. We can keep collections off of top shelves and away from direct contact with windows. The book that you see in the slide here was at the end of a shelf that was right up against a window, and so you can see what damage that can do. And we want to protect materials that may be particularly susceptible to light damage, such as framed color photographs or watercolors, by displaying them away from any direct sunlight or spotlights, and by using UV blocking glazing, so either glass or plexiglass, or because we have the ability now, we can display very good quality facsimiles. And then finally, keeping lights off in spaces when they are not occupied, especially after hours. So again, putting motion sensing light into exhibit areas if you have a separate exhibit space will help a lot. So air quality is another thing that we want to think about. Contaminants in the air can really damage our collections. And in many ways, it depends, again, on what your location is as to how much pollution you will have in the air. Some of the pollutants will be in our environment, so paints and wood, carpeting, any of these materials, when they are new, will off-gas volatile organic compounds, but others are brought in through the outside air. So we can think of some of these things, some of these airborne contaminants as ozone. So ozone will be created by photocopiers and printers and such. Sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides from the burning of fossil fuels, and our volatile organic compounds from storage equipment, flooring, paint, soft furnishings. We also need to think about dust and soot and mold, as well as the cleaning chemicals that may be used around our building. So the airborne pollutants are a large category of contaminants that we need to be concerned with. The sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides, shortened to SOxes and NOxes, are a direct cause of acid rain. And these pollutants are also brought into our institutions through our HVAC systems and react with the relative humidity in the air and come into contact with our collections that way. And the sulfur, the SOxes and NOxes not only break down into very minute forms of sulfuric acid and nitric acid. At the molecular level, it won't harm you, but over time, those chemicals will find their way into our collections and cause a lot of damage. But those SOxes and NOxes also then leave nitrogen and sulfur in the air, and sulfur is a big problem that we have with a lot of the tarnishing of our silver. So it can impact our collections on many different levels. And then ozone is a really strong catalyst in chemical deterioration because ozone, unlike oxygen, has an extra oxygen that we breathe normally is O2. Ozone is O3, and it's very unstable, and that extra little oxygen on there will break apart quite easily and start a chemical reaction within your collections. So it's a very strong oxidant, and unfortunately our collections can't eat things like blueberries, which are, you know, strong antioxidants that help us to fight off aging. It's just they can't do that. So our volatile organic compounds are also a problem. The best way that I can describe it is to look at your cars at the end of a winter, and you usually have that white milky film on your windshield. Those are the volatile organic compounds coming off from the plastics in your dashboard. And so they really do exist, even though we can't always smell them, and they do have a big impact on our collections. Like I said, also dust is another problem with our air quality. It's not so much going to give chemical reaction problems to our collections, but a lot of what is in dust is very attractive to mold, so they will find a good food source. And also, depending on how gritty the dust is, it can cause problems with abrasions and scratching on your collection materials, so you do really want to watch out for it. And finally, our cleaning chemicals used by our housekeeping crews. We really want to know what is being used and where, and making sure that nothing is being used in or around our collections or exhibit spaces, because those chemicals will leave behind byproducts that will be damaging and give off their own volatile organic compounds just in the use of them. So as with, you know, light and temperature and relative humidity, there are ways that we can prevent or mitigate problems with air quality. So where possible, we want to be sure that we're filtering our incoming air to reduce dust and mold. So again, another good reason to be changing those filters on a regular basis in our HVAC systems, or cleaning those filters on our window air conditioners, and things of that sort. You can filter airborne pollutants right as they come into the building, but it generally tends to be very costly and doesn't provide a sufficient return on investments. So really more focus on those filters in your HVAC system. You want to regularly clean storage spaces, and by regularly, this can even just be an annual project. To reduce dust and discourage pests, it's really going to depend on how dirty your space gets. If you're having new construction or remodeling, please allow any of those new materials to off-gas before moving collections into the space. So let that carpet go and stop, you know, off-gassing. Let the adhesives stop off-gassing. Let the paint really stop off-gassing, because that can really be problematic. We always want to try to use inert materials in our exhibition cases and our storage containers. So we would like to avoid any wooden products, especially oak or MDF or plywood. They really off-gas badly. Oak especially off-gasses acetic acid, which catalyzes the deterioration just like the SOxs and NOxs. And finally, when you're handling any sort of photographs, films, metals, especially like the silver here, wear clean protective nitrile or cotton gloves without the little nibs on them, and that will help prevent any sort of pollutant damage to those materials as well. So in order to have an accurate record, we talked about monitoring our environment. And so we want to just think a little bit about how we would go about monitoring that environment. We already know why we want to do it. So there, oh, so sorry. There are various instruments available to measure the temperature and the relative humidity independently, and these instruments fall into two categories. They can be just snapshot measurements, so for a record of the conditions at a very specific moment, and these would be like your max-min thermohygrometers that you can easily get at Target, Walmart, Home Depot, anything like that. And then you have the recording instruments, and those would record a continuous record of the climate condition. So if you're going with a snapshot type instrument, it really only provides a rough picture of the environment and is really dependent on human participation. So you need to make sure it's in somebody's job description to go and check that maximum and minimum for every day, record it in a book, and then clear the settings so that you can go back and get new readings that aren't overlapping. Preferable are the recording hygrothermographs that you can get. And those can come in the old-fashioned form of the box with the paper and the pens. But again, that requires human intervention to change the papers, change the pens, make sure that the battery is still working, or if it's really old, wind it up, and then to annually calibrate it. And that can be a lot of work, and so a lot of people, and can be very expensive. And so a lot of institutions are going to the modern data loggers that record on a regular basis, and you just go and download the information. And the biggest thing you have to worry about is changing a battery. The image on the screen that you see is the Preservation Environmental Monitor 2, produced by the Image Permanence Institute. And they have a great online program that allows you to download the information and do a lot of number crunching to see how you're doing in terms of collections and whatnot. But you can also get a multitude of other types of data loggers in a wide range of prices. And so because purchasing these data loggers are an investment, you want to think about some questions before deciding on what type of data logger you want to purchase. So again, what is our building structure like? Some of the data loggers that you can get are wireless, and that function may not be possible in all buildings because of the construction materials used. So don't go buy wireless and then bring them into the building to find out that the radio signals won't work. What sort of building management system, or BMS, is used? The information recorded by some data loggers can easily be incorporated into the BMS, so you might want to just find out within your own institution if that would be helpful. But then you also want to look at what the software for the data loggers is like. Some data loggers come with the software that can do most of the analysis. Others will just provide simple graphs, and if that's enough for you, then that's fine. How is the space that you're going to monitor used? So some data loggers are small and unobtrusive, others are quite large. So those old-fashioned hygrothermographs are quite large and can take up a lot of space. Some of the small snapshot sort of ones can easily be hidden so that they don't deter from the aesthetics of a space. So because depending on where you're placing your data loggers, you may want to consider if you want them to be seen or not. So it's entirely up to you. So you might want to base some of your decision making on that. You want to think about what is the required frequency of measurements and downloads. Different data loggers have different memory capacities, so depending on how frequently your measurements are taken, if you take measurements very frequently, it's going to require frequent downloading to ensure that you don't lose any data. And then how accurate do you need the readings to be? Some data loggers use sensors that are temperature compensated, meaning the logger can provide about 3% accuracy for the relative humidity over a wide range. Others do not. So you want to think about how accurate. And for our purposes, that's probably accurate enough. And some sensors may also have a time lag of about 4 to 5 minutes if the humidity is falling. So if you're doing if you need really frequent sampling, this could be a disadvantage. And so it's something to think about. And so for many of you, you will probably have the option of being able to utilize the environmental monitoring program sponsored by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. I believe this is only for public libraries, but it's a good opportunity for you to get, I believe it's either 1 or 3 months, I can't remember now. Check with Gregor Trinkus-Randall. He'll be able to give you all the information on that. But it's a way for you to have a professional come in, place monitors for you in appropriate locations, and then take the monitors away, download the information, and give you a full report. And it's a really great opportunity for those of you in public libraries. So we're going to stop part 2 here, and we will pick up again in part 3 with the specifics of collection, storage, and handling. So thank you for your time, and again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you and have a good day.